Hi, this is Cindy Moss, and I am the professor for your BUS 101 Introduction to Business online. This is M Business, and the authors are Farrell, Hurt, and Farrell, and we are using the 5th edition of the book. We're going to begin with the first part, which will encompass chapters 1, 2, and 3, and it's talking about business in a changing world and the dynamics of business and economics. The first thing that we want to do is to define what a business is, or what the nature of business is. Business can be individuals or organizations who want to earn a profit, and they do that by providing products that's going to satisfy people's or their customers' needs. And they're going to provide the products, which can be goods or services, with tangible and intangible characteristics, which we'll talk about in the next slide. But when you purchase a product, remember, you're buying the benefit and satisfaction that you think that product is going to provide. The book gives us an example of a Subway sandwich. We go into a Subway Subway shop, we paid for a sandwich, and our goal for that sandwich is to satisfy our hunger. The next thing that we need to talk about is what is a product. When we talk about a product, generally you're thinking about a tangible good. And when I'm talking about a tangible good, I'm talking about something I can put my hands on, I can hold in my hand. An automobile would be a tangible product, computer, an iPhone, or a coat. But a product can also be a service, anything that I am paying for this person to do for me. For instance, dry cleaning. If I take a dress to the dry cleaners, I am paying them to clean and press that dress. Also, a doctor's visit. That can be a product, because when I go in, I'm paying the doctor to examine me or one of my family members. A basketball game or a concert are some other examples of tangible goods. Also, ideas. We don't generally think of ideas as being tangible, because we can't really put our hands on an idea, but it's what our ideas generate. We come up with an idea for solving a product. So accountants, attorneys, they are coming up. If I go to my attorney and I want him to draw up a will or something for me, they're generating an idea of what I'm wanting them to do, and I'm going to pay them for that idea.
What do you think of? Money? Profit, power, greed, crushing the competition? Look, business can be those things. Sometimes it has to be about those things. But the reality is that for most of us that want to earn a living without compromising our morals, without hurting others to get ahead, business is about creating good things for customers. It's about satisfying our employees and our business partners. Make no mistake, business is about making money, but you can't make that money without customers, employees, and business partners. Yeah, believe it or not, business is about making people happy, making people comfortable. It's also about learning and growing so you can know how to make people happy and comfortable in the future. But remember, business is not about achieving one of those things. It's about doing all of them. Today, tomorrow, 5 years from now, 20 years from now. Great business is not about overnight success. Great business is about indefinite success. Contrary to what movies may have taught you, business is not just about understanding money. To be successful in business, you need to understand people. What do customers want? How do they want it? How can I get more from my employees? What kind of company do people respect? You need to understand infrastructure, buildings, roads, the internet, the legal system. You need to understand resources, supplies, raw materials, energy. You need quality resources at a good price. Business is art, and these are our paints and our canvas. Money, people, and infrastructure. That's the tangible stuff. How about the intangible stuff? To be successful in business, you also need to be aware of what happened yesterday, what's happening right now, and how I can use data, information, and knowledge to make better decisions tomorrow. Finance, accounting, sales and marketing, supply chain management, human resource management, information technology. Instead of thinking of these functions as being about investing, selling, manufacturing, hiring, and firing, think of them as tools to help you understand money and people. Think of them as data centers. Think of them as groups of people with knowledge. Think of them as aids in making decisions that will make people both happy and comfortable. Wealth, power, and greed. Those may be cool words to motivate teenagers that dream about becoming millionaires overnight. For the rest of us, those that actually work, those that want to create a better world, those that want to become active members of our global society, get ready to learn about real business. Because by understanding money, people, information, resources, and infrastructure, by understanding how to make customers happy, you'll have the ability to start and successfully run your own company. You'll be able to get the most out of a nonprofit organization. You'll even be able to maximize government's value to the community. And in the process, you will become a valuable resource for any organization.
So let's get down to what is the goal of business. The primary goal of every business is to earn a profit. The concept of profit is central to all business activities. As we move through every chapter in this book, keep important that this is the whole concept of business is to make a profit. If I'm not making a profit, then I shouldn't even be in business. Now, that doesn't mean our first year, if we're an entrepreneur and we go into business for ourselves, generally we're not going to make a profit the first year. But our goal is every year to keep increasing our sales so that we are making a profit. Now, when we're talking about a profit, it is the difference between what it costs to make a product and what we sell it for. So the example here is that we have a $10 sale. Say we're selling a dress for $10, but we paid $8 to have the dress made, and so we have a $2 profit. Anytime we're making a profit, we are contributing to our society because we're employing people that in turn these people take the money we have paid them and they go back and invest it in the economy. We're paying taxes on that money. So every time we are making a profit, it is trickle down effect. Everybody's going to benefit from it. Another thing we want to remember is that profits must be earned in a responsible manner. Not all organizations will exist to make a profit. Nonprofit organizations, they will provide goods and services, but they don't have the fundamental purpose of earning a profit. But they must make money, or somehow people are giving them money in order to exist. They cannot operate, pay their employees, pay rent, different things like that, if they are not making money. Like all businesses, nonprofit organizations still do they engage in the same cycle that profit organizations do: management, marketing, finance, that help them reach their goals. Some of the nonprofit organizations that the book talks about is Habitat for Humanity, the National Public Radio, Red Cross, Special Olympics. All of those are classified as nonprofit organizations. So what does it require generally to make a profit? And we will be covering every one of these, not in just chapter 1, but throughout our book. We will focus on what are the skills that are needed for each one. Management skills. How do we manage people? Marketing expertise. I personally feel like that marketing is one of the most important aspects of any business, because if you're not getting your product out there, people are not going to buy it. Financial resources. Where are we going to get the money to finance our business? abiding by the law, making sure that everything we do is above board. One of the hard things that we have to do is to adapt to change. We have to know that businesses go through a cycle, and we may be on top of the world this year, and then next year our product tanks. So what do we do to either reinvent our product, or what do we do to come up with something new as a product? And then of course we have to act ethically, not only obeying the laws of our company, the laws of our state and local governments, our federal government, but are we acting ethically to our customers and to our employees?
CEO of a bank, and I asked him what his purpose was, and he said, well, to deliver shareholder value. That's a common answer for a CEO, but in reality, you have to distinguish between shareholders and stakeholders. If all you're focused on is delivering shareholder value, it will all be about money, money, money all the time, and you'll lose sight of the customers. Stakeholders are the people who show up every day to work, who you want passionately engaged in the purpose of your organization. Shareholders invest because they want to make short-term money, let's be honest. Stakeholders need to be invested for the long term. And so it's important, if you're in a leadership position, that you differentiate between shareholders and stakeholders, because the stakeholders of your business are the people you want on fire for that business. Shareholders, they're going to go based on the quarterly earnings. Now, these two things are closely connected. And if you look at a lot of the people that choose stock, they'll tell you, pick a company with a strong sense of purpose because you'll get better earnings over time. But you as a leader need to make sure you have a clear differentiation between the needs of shareholders and the needs of stakeholders. Shareholders don't have to be emotionally engaged. Stakeholders must be emotionally engaged if you want them to perform.
As the video that you just watched shows, it talks about the difference between shareholders and stakeholders. Shareholders are very important to every business, but stakeholders are that group that have a stake in the success and outcomes of a business. Stakeholders include customers, employees, investors. Government is also a stakeholder. Anything in the community is a stakeholder. Businesses have found that you must produce quality products, you have to operate efficiently, and you have to be socially responsible and ethical, in dealing with customers, employees, investors. So every one of these are important. I want us to take a minute and think about who are the stakeholders at Reinhardt. Just jot down what you think a few would be. All right, number one, of course, would be the students. The staff and faculty would be a stakeholder. The administration would be a stakeholder. The board of directors would be a stakeholder. Also, what about the city of Canton, the city of Waleska? They would be stakeholders for Reinhardt because they have a stake in the success of Reinhardt succeeding. So when you're thinking about a stakeholder versus a shareholder, shareholders generally, again, financially based, think about who are the people that want to see my business succeed. What we learned about stakeholders. Stakeholders are anyone that has an interest in seeing that a company succeeds. So thinking on those terms, who do you think stakeholders would be at Reinhardt University? Let's just see if we can come up with a few. To me, students would definitely be a stakeholder. Your faculty would be a stakeholder. Your staff, anybody that works for Reinhardt, would be a stakeholder. The board of directors would be stakeholders. Of course, Dr. Mallard, the president, and all of the administrative team would be stakeholders. Your coaches, your athletes, coaches and assistant coaches would be stakeholders. What about the other teams that we play? So that they would be stakeholders, because if they didn't have us to play, then they wouldn't be having that. So we could say other athletic teams would be stakeholders. And one of them that I like to mention to my students as stakeholders is the city of Canton and the city of Waleska. They are stakeholders because they would lose a lot of revenue if Reinhardt no longer existed. So this is just a way for you to think about stakeholders and how important they are to an organization. Here is a figure that you see in your book on page 4, and it basically represents an overview of the business world. And again, we will be covering every one of these. Note that the owners, the employees, I'm going to draw a circle around this for you. The owners, employees, and customers are at the center of this figure. That means they are what builds that organization. They are the ones that we have to focus on. And notice as you move out, we have finance, we have marketing, we have social management, which includes social. And then we have, again, on the outside, we have competition, economy, information technology, all your legal and political forces, and then the social and responsibility ethics. Again, these are external environments. Most of these are considered internal environments. As you saw in that previous figure, remember that management and employees were in the center, the same segment of the circle, because that is because management is involved in coordinating employees' actions to achieve the firm's goals. That's one thing you want to keep in mind as we, again, move through this chapter and future chapters, is that we always have to work toward achieving the goals of the organization. As a manager, it would be your responsibility to make sure that your people are working efficiently and motivating them, again, to meet those customer goals. Some of the other things that management are involved with is in acquiring people, their human resources, developing them, and in using resources, including people, to be effective and efficiently. So the 4 things that managers are going to be focusing on is they've got to have a plan. They have to know what they are going to do and how they are going to achieve it. Then how are they going to organize not only that plan, but the goals of the organization. They're responsible for the staff. Sometimes managers are hiring the personnel, sometimes they're not. But as a manager, it would be your responsibility to make sure that your employees are there, they're working, and they are achieving those goals. And then finally, that they're controlling those tasks, that they know what the outcome of those tasks are. So let's take a few minutes now and talk about marketing. And I said earlier that to me, marketing is one of the most important things that any company can do, because you've got to not only provide your customers with the goods and services, but you got to let them know that it is out there. Marketing is focused on satisfying those customers' needs. The focus of marketing is, again, to satisfy the customers. So first of all, we got to determine what that customer needs. What is it I can provide for the customer? Then I have to plan and develop my product. I have to determine how I'm going to distribute that product, where I'm going to distribute it, how I'm going to promote it. Is it going to be advertising on TV, radio? Is it e-advertising? Anything like that. And then finally, I have to determine what is a good price. If I think my product's worth more than the customers are willing to pay, then I am not going to be successful. If you look, again, on page 5 of your book, it talks about the M&M's advertising, and I get a kick out of watching their advertising on TV. One of the newer ones now is the guy has one of the M&M's, future M&M's, has a laminated resume, and of course we all know you don't laminate your resume, so it's just a way of getting into the market and making you remember that there's coming out a new M&M, and it's going to be a caramel M&M, and so we think about, oh, I can't wait till that product's on the market. Although management and marketing have to deal with some parts of the financial consideration, it is primarily the responsibility of the owner to provide financial resources for the operation of the business. Finance refers to all the activities that are concerned with money and using it. We'll get into that in chapters 13, 14, and 15, I believe. But, you know, the owner has to obtain the money. The owner is the one that is making sure the money is used effectively. Now, in corporations, it wouldn't be just the owner. You would have a board of directors that would approve all financing. They would look at if we wanted to borrow money, if it was feasible, different things like that. But in a small business, primarily it is your owner that's going to be taking care of all the money. One of the other things that we will touch on in this chapter and in further chapters is the economic foundations of business. We define economics as how resources are distributed for the production of goods and services within a social system. And here it's talking about the American banks that Bill Daniels created. With economics, the economic foundation of business, a couple things we want to look at and remember. First of all is our natural resources. To me, this is one of the most important things because most of these cannot be reproduced. We only have so much land, we only have so much forest. We can create lakes, but these are things that are not made by people. Then of course you have human resources, and this is also referred to as labor, and that is the physical and mental abilities people use to produce their services. Your financial services is also called capital. So if you hear someone refer to financial capital, they're talking about funds, they're talking about money. And then one of the most important to me, again, behind natural resources is something referred to as intangible resources. And that's a good reputation, that they're quality products, that your product, you stand behind your product. Walmart, although they are not considered an upper scale business, they stand behind their products. If something goes wrong with it, something you buy through them, you can return it. That is something that people look at when they're looking at investing, when they're looking at the stock market, or even when they're going to buy a product. Let's talk about economic systems. An economic system describes how a particular society distributes its resources to produce goods and services. One of the things you want to focus on, a central issue of economics, is how to fulfill an unlimited demand for goods and services with a world with limited resources. And this is something that we're faced with every day in our society. You know, what goods and services and how much of each do we need to produce? How are they going to be produced? Where are we going to get the resources? And then how are we going to distribute them to our consumers? One of the economic systems that we want to look at is communism. Now, communism was described by Karl Marx as a society in which people, without regard to class, own all the nation's resource. On paper, it appears very efficient and that everybody, you know, is equal. But in practice, this economy suffers. If you go over to Russia, they have a very low standard of living. They have a critical shortage of consumer goods. They very, very high prices. And just from watching PBS and different documentaries, the corruption is rampant in Russia, and the people really have little freedom. There's a very, very different in the structure of the classes. You either have a lot of money or you are very, very poor. The next system we want to talk about is socialism. In socialism, the government will own and operate the basic industries, such as in Sweden, or rather in France, the postal service is owned by the government. It's fully owned and it's operated by the government, and they actually make a profit. Most socialist countries, such as Sweden, India, and Israel, are democratic and they recognize individual freedoms. The people can vote for the public political offices, but generally the government makes the decisions on what's best for the nations. People in those countries are free to go into any occupation that they want to, but most of them really will work in the government offices because they do have a better pay scale. Socialist systems tend to allow a higher standard of living, but generally the taxes and unemployment are generally higher in socialist countries. Okay, the last one we want to look at is capitalism or free enterprise, and it is a system in which individuals own and operate the majority of businesses that provide the goods and the services. Pure capitalism or a free market system happens when all economic decisions are made without government interference or intervention, and it's also called laissez-faire capitalism. Modified capitalism differs from pure capitalism in that the government intervenes and regulates businesses to some extent. We are in the United States more of a modified capitalism because even though we are free to operate our businesses, we do have government regulations, rules that we do have to abide by. One thing you want to think about is that free enterprise provides an opportunity for business to fail or succeed based on that demand, and the government generally won't have any backlash as to what you're selling. Some of the examples of free enterprise, of course, is Australia, the United States, Canada, and Japan are your four major, again, either capitalism, free enterprise, or what we consider the modified capitalistic nation. The next two slides just kind of give you an overview of the comparison of communism, socialism, and capitalism. So if you look over here on the left side, it explains that, for instance, business ownership, that in the communistic country, that the businesses are owned and operated by the government. In socialism, the government owns and operates the major industries, but individuals can own small businesses. And then in the capitalism, individuals own and operate all the businesses. So it just kind of, these two will give you an overview. This slide basically compares the product availability, pricing, and employment options within the communistic, socialism, and capitalism countries of the world. I explained on a couple of slides previously that modified capitalism differs from pure capitalism in that the government intervenes and regulates our businesses. And again, we are considered a modified capitalistic government. For instance, we have the Federal Trade Commission Acts where we actually have to abide by government regulations, and it shows the importance of the government's role in our economy. No country practices a pure form of communism, socialism, or capitalism. Most of them will favor one over the other, but most countries operate as a mixed economy, which have elements of more than one of the economic systems. One of the examples that the book gives us is in Sweden. Most businesses are owned and operated by private individuals. In capitalist United States, an independent federal agency operates the U.S. Post Office. So in Sweden, the government operates the post office as a private industry, but in the United States, it is independent, even though it is under the umbrella of the federal government. The free enterprise system, like we talked about a little bit earlier, it's the allowing small businesses, large businesses to have free enterprise, to be able to succeed or fail based on the basis of the market. The U.S., Canada, and Japan, they are very large free enterprise economies. And we are beginning to see that some of the communist and socialist countries, including China and Russia, are beginning to apply these free enterprise principles. And I credit that to the young people in maybe your age group, where they're beginning to see that they don't want the government to tell them everything that they have to do, that they want to have more of a say-so in their futures. And so hopefully that maybe in the future that the communist and the socialist countries will be more open to free enterprise within their countries. A number of the basic individual and business rights must exist for free enterprise to work. These rights are considered the goals for many of the countries that have recently begun to embrace free capitalism and enterprise. Some of them include the right to own property, the right to earn profits and use them as one wishes, the right to determine your business operations, right to choose your career, where you live, what kind of goods and services to purchase, and more. In the United States, we have every one of these. Can you imagine living in a country where you could not buy a house or you could not buy your own business if you made profits that somebody told them what you had to do with the money, or to tell you exactly how and when you're going to operate your business? So by living in the United States, if you are a United States citizen, you have these rights, and these are rights that you should cherish and protect. Okay, let's talk just a few minutes about the forces of supply and demand. And after this slide, there is a YouTube video that really explains supply and demand a little easier, where everybody can understand it. But when we're talking about supply, that's the number of products that businesses are willing to sell at different prices at a specific time. Demand is the number of products consumers are willing to buy at a different price at a specific time. Let me see if I can give you an example. Suntan lotion. It is, during the very beginning of the summer, say the end of May, the 1st of June, suntan lotion, everybody wants to buy it. So that is the demand. There is a price. If I go down to Walgreens, I'm going to pay $10 for a bottle of suntan lotion. At the end of the summer, then no one is using suntan lotion. So Walgreens, the supply has gone down, so they're going to sell that $10 bottle of suntan lotion, maybe 3 for $10. So the supply's gone down, and so I can get it at a cheaper price. Again, watch this quick video on the next slide, and it'll give you an overview of supply and demand.
Supply and demand. If you've only heard of one economics concept, it's probably supply and demand. Eventually we'll want to derive this concept from basic assumptions about utility and cost functions, but for now I'll just go through the 2-minute version. Let's start with supply. A supply curve is a relationship between the price of a certain good and the amount of that good producers make. Let's say they're producing umbrellas. Supply curves typically slope upwards, since a higher price means producers can earn more from each item they sell, so it's worth it for them to produce more of that item. Now, on to demand. A demand curve is a relationship between the price of a certain good and the amount of that good buyers want to buy. Although there are exceptions, most demand curves slope downwards. Intuitively, you'll buy more of something if it's cheaper. If we graph our supply curve and our demand curve together, we get this cool little X. The price at which supply and demand cross is the market clearing price. If the price is at the market clearing level, producers produce exactly as many umbrellas as buyers want to buy. So every umbrella is sold, and everyone who wants to buy an umbrella can do so. What if the price of umbrellas is higher than the market clearing price? Then producers make more umbrellas than buyers are willing to buy at that price, and we have a surplus. Similarly, if the price of umbrellas is set below the market clearing price, buyers want to buy lots of umbrellas, but producers aren't so eager to produce that many, so we have a shortage of umbrellas. It's important to realize that the words surplus and shortage always refer to price phenomena. 1,000 umbrellas could constitute a surplus if the price of an umbrella is $100, or it could constitute a shortage if the price of an umbrella is $1. Where would we expect to see prices in our supply and demand model? The answer depends on many things. It depends on whether there is one producer or many, on whether there is one buyer or many, on what the laws are, and on how quickly the market can react to a sudden rainstorm.
In this figure, we're going to be talking about the equilibrium price, or where they intersect, and that is explained on page 10 of your book. It's at the intersection where the supply and demand are equal. The price at which the number of products that a business are willing to supply equals the amount of products that consumers are willing to buy at a specific point in the time. And it gives you the example of rugs. Say handmade rugs for our consumers would be willing to buy 6 rugs at $350 each, or 4 at $500, but only 2 at $650 each. So I'm going, that equilibrium price, which is right here, would be around $500 would be what the price would be. Okay, the next 2 slides are going to be talking about competition. And competition is the rivalry among all the businesses for the consumer dollar. The first type of competition is pure competition, and that is when there's just small businesses selling one standardized product. The book talks about wheat, corn, and cotton are some examples. The products that no business sells enough of the products to influence the price. The price is basically based on supply and demand. Monopolistic competition is when it's fewer businesses than pure, but there's differences among the goods they sell. One of the examples your book gives you is aspirin. If I go into Walmart and I go to the pharmacy and I see the shelf that's nothing but aspirin. I have Aleve, I have Advil, I have Equate, I have Excedrin. although they all do the same thing, their packaging may be a little bit different, the warranty be different. They all will satisfy getting rid of my headache. It's just what product, which brand I want to buy. The next type of competition that we're going to talk about is oligopoly, and that is when the market structure exists when there are very few businesses selling a product. And your book really talks about the airline industry in this particular one, because basically they all sell the same product. They're going to get you on an airplane from a point A to point B. They generally have the same pricing. Every now and then, if one airline cuts the pricing, the other one will go in and cut fares. But most of the time, they basically are very, very similar. Oligopolies exist when it's expensive for new firms to enter the marketplace, and most of the time they're not going to succeed. I look back a couple of years ago when JetBlue tried to enter the Atlanta market, and Delta just overwhelmed them and they didn't succeed. So that is what that is. A monopoly is when exist when there's only one business providing a product in that given market. And one of them they talk about is the utility companies, electricity, natural gas, and water. They're monopolies. I live in the city of Canton. I have no resource other than the city of Canton water. Well, I guess I could go to the grocery store and just buy buckets and buckets of water. But to have water come into my house, it is a monopoly. I have to use the city of Canton. Let's look at the economic cycles and productivities for the next 3 slides. Keep in mind that economies are not stagnant. They expand and they contract. Expansion occurs when economy is growing, people are spending more money, your purchases stimulate the production of goods and services, which in turn stimulates employment. Right now we are in an economic expansion. 6-7 years ago, we were just the opposite. People were not buying, people were not spending. So we've kind of had a turnaround. One thing that we have to remember is that during an economic expansion, it can lead to inflation, which is a continuing rise in prices. We see that. One thing that I've noticed is eggs. Last year I was paying 56 cents for a dozen eggs. This year I'm paying almost $2 for a dozen eggs. That is a continuation in the rise of prices. An economic contraction is when there is a slowdown of the economy, and we're quit spending. Businesses cut back on production and they lay off workers. We had this back in the early 2000s. It started with the housing industry. People began to cut back on building houses and businesses, and that was then a trickle-down effect where people lost their jobs, people lost their houses. The economic contraction can lead to a decline in production, employment, and income. One thing you want to remember is that recessions are often characterized by high rising levels of unemployment. That's the condition in which the percentage of the population wants to work. That's your key word that you want to remember here. They want to work, but maybe they're not able to find jobs. Deflation occurs when rising employment stifles the demand, forcing prices down. One thing I can remember back in the 2000s was people didn't go out to eat because they had lost their jobs and they were cutting back. They did not go out. They would stay at home and eat. And so your restaurant industry began to offer all kinds of incentives to get people to come in and come into the restaurant and eat. So that would be one of the prices, forcing prices down. And a recession A severe recession can turn into a depression, and that is when the condition of the economy is so very unemployment is high, consumer spending is low, and business output is sharply reduced. Of course, back in the 1920s, I believe it was, is when we had the Great Depression, and that is when, you know, people were forced you know, to do anything to get jobs. They sold wood off of their land, everything like that. A lot of people characterized back in the early 2000s as being in a depression, but the government never actually declared it a depression. They just said we were just in a recession. Inflation can be harmful if the individual's incomes do not increase at the same pace as the rising prices, which would of course reduce the buying power. The book talks about the worst case of hyperinflation was in Hungary in 1946. And at one point, the prices were doubling every 15.6 hours. So that would be like, I'll go up to Publix and I would buy a gallon of milk for $2.59. But I go back in the very next day, 15 hours later, and I'm going to be paying $5 a gallon for a gallon of milk. So that's hyperinflation. The book talks about one of the most recent cases occurred in Zimbabwe, and it was so inflated that the rate rose into the millions. And with what happened was the elimination of the Zimbabwe dollar, and they put in certain price controls. So then the rate began to decrease, but it was already so high that the country's economy was virtually decimated. It did it away with it. And if you read about Zimbabwe now, they are, you know, people, they can't afford to buy food. And they're having to do without, and it's just, look at some of the pictures if you get a chance. Go on their website and see how children are starving to death because their parents have no money to buy food. Let's talk about how we measure our economy. All countries use some type of a standard to determine whether they're expanding or contracting, and then they will come up with corrective measures how to minimize the fluctuation. The United States uses the GDP, or the gross domestic product, and that's the sum of all goods and services produced in a country during the year. Now, that does not include profits from companies' overseas operations. So even though McDonald's, say for instance, has operations in almost every foreign country, when they look at their gross domestic product, it does not include what they made in Japan or China or anything like that. It is only within the United States. The next thing we want to talk about is the budget deficit, and that is the condition in which a nation spends more than it takes in from taxes. And the United States has a budget deficit. It's at record levels. In 2014, our deficit was $18 trillion. Let me repeat that. $18 trillion, and that was in 2014. Take a few minutes after you look at this and go Google and see what our budget deficit is now. You, as young people, are going to be responsible for the budget deficit. You're going to be paying taxes. Your taxes are going to have to be raised in order to take care of this budget deficit. The government, they come up with all these programs and stimulus spending and things like that, and we just get further and further in deficit. This slide just gives you an overview of how to evaluate our economy. The trade balance, that's the difference between what we're bringing in and what we're shipping out. If the balance is a negative, which it has been since the 80s, that's called a trade deficit, and it's generally unhealthy for our economy. You have your consumer price index, which measures the change in prices and services. This is updated every day. You can look on websites and see what that is. The per capita income, I find this very interesting because it indicates the income level for average Americans. It says what the average consumer spends and how much the average American are earning. Education is based on per capita income. If you have a minute, go to your county and see what your average per capita income is and see how you think your family falls in that. Unemployment, we talked about, it's working age Americans who are not working but want to. Inflation, again, we talked about that, is how much the goods and services cost us. And then worker productivity is the amount of goods and services produced for each hour worked. This will be very important when we talk about manufacturing and productivity. This slide just basically talks about the history of our American economy. And of course, the very early economy, we were an agriculture economy. People produced everything they needed at home. When I think of this, I think of Little House on the Prairie and how they lived in a big house, and they grew everything, and the mother made all the clothes. That is your agriculture economy. Then we had the Industrial Revolution, and that was when we began with the factories, and we had new technologies, and we had material, machine, and workers. Then we went to the manufacturing and marketing economy, where we did the assembly line productions, and we began to focus on customer needs. This was during that era where we began to think, okay, what are we making and what does our customer need? Today we are what is called the service and new digital economy, and that's where service and technology are leading our country. A lot of our book will be discussing and focusing on becoming an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is one who is willing to risk their wealth, their time, their effort to develop products, innovative products, or way of doing something. If you are thinking about starting your own business or coming up with a product, some of the things you need to be able to checklist that I can do this. Are you willing to take risk? If you are very cautious, you're probably not going to succeed as an entrepreneur. You've got to be innovative. You've got to look at things that maybe are in our society today and come up with new ways, faster ways, more efficient ways of doing something. You have to be creative. Again, you've got to be able to think outside the box. If I gave you a paper clip and I told you to name me 15 ways you could use the paper clip, how many could you really name? Could you come up with ways to use a paper clip? And then entrepreneurs are really rewarded, not only financially, but it's a way of, attaboy, I did it. So maybe one of you in my class will be the next great entrepreneur. As we talked about several slides, the U.S. economy is best described as a modified capitalism because, of course, we have government regulations. They encourage competition. They protect the stakeholders and consumers, employees, and environment. They have laws that force our businesses to adhere to government standards. And we do have government agencies like the U.S. Department of Commerce and the Federal Reserve Board that sometimes have to intervene with our economy and spur the growth of our economy. In the past few years, you've probably read about or heard on the news about a number of scandals at well-known corporations such as General Motors, Honda, and Walmart, some banks such as Bank of America, Citigroup. Business ethics generally refer to the standards and principles used by society to determine appropriate and inappropriate behavior in the workplace. If you get a minute, go on YouTube, and the book never discusses this one. It's called the Enron Corporation. Watch the short videos, or there is the full-length movie. To me, Enron was the epitome of businesses that were greedy, and they didn't care about their stakeholders or their employees and different things like that. And I think if we would make an example of businesses that behaved unethically, then there would be probably very, very few businesses that behaved such as the Enron Corporation. Business ethics are generally set by society. We're beginning to hold businesses accountable. Sometimes their profits depend on their ethics and social responsibility, and we as stakeholders are beginning to demand ethical and social responsible behavior. The next slide is basically just a video talking about business ethics and the role of business in ethics. That concludes chapter 1. Be sure that you look at your syllabus, and you know that you have a Learn Smart, a quiz, you'll have a discussion board question, and probably a case study. So I hope you've enjoyed chapter 1, and we will get into chapter 2. Thank you.
Marketing managers are interested in long-term corporate interests and also society's health. A new philosophical trend in social responsibility is called sustainability. It is the thought that if a company helps society through their business as a main goal, then they will reap success. Companies can look to solve society's problems by creating a product or service to fulfill a need, and they will profit and help the world. Other examples of products made by companies that embrace this philosophy would be makeup creams made from ingredients that are imported from developing companies to help their country's growth. Another example would be ice cream maker Ben & Jerry's, who pride themselves in supporting charities. Ben & Jerry's has been donating a full 7.5% of pre-tax profits to different charitable institutions. Sustainability's forward thinking revolves around creating new products that in the long run will create improvement over time in society's ills. A current example would be a backpack designed with solar panels to charge electronic devices, or 100% biodegradable recycled cardboard coffins. Another way that companies can embrace social responsibility is through a different approach called stakeholder theory. This theory's central focus is that social responsibility is really giving attention to every stakeholder in the entire company, whether it be the employees, customers, owners, suppliers, management, or the community. The following is how each stakeholder would view social responsibility from their company. It is a more widespread approach and far-reaching. Employees want to have a good, secure job and excellent wages, while management wants happy workers and profits. Customers expect excellent customer service and high-quality products, while the community wants a corporation to pay their taxes, offer their citizens good wages, and help support the environment by not polluting. Suppliers want their business to remain plentiful, and owners, of course, want a financial return for an excellent profit. The most common reason against social responsibility is that critics feel the main purpose of a corporation is just to make a profit for their stakeholders. Nonprofits should be the only institutions concerned about society, not a for-profit business. Critics state that for most companies to participate in a socially responsible way, they need to spend more of their firm's money, and in the end are costing their shareholders a profit. For example, if a company is going to import ingredients from a developing nation instead of using a well-known source, then the added cost